Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for U Sports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics, bringing you the however manyth installment of the exit meeting interviews. This week, it is me and Tom rocking solo, talking a little K-ya, taking our talents out to Kingston, Ontario to talk the Queen's Golden Gales football program. We're going to get into all things with that program, who's doing what, and what we're excited about going into this year. But first, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm always doing well anytime I get to talk a little OUA, U Sports football action with you, my friend. I've been pondering of late. I know this is from a while ago, and I know that you and I have essentially just ignored that completely, but just so curious why Queens decided to drop the Golden from Golden Gales. It just doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Why would you not keep that Golden Gales as a part of your logo?
It's a great question. I always harken back to our friend Dakota Vine thinking that a Gale was some kind of a bird. I think it's some kind of Scott warrior of some kind. Not terribly important. What is important is that we're talking about that team out of Kingston, the team that started off the decade, the post-pandemic era, in two straight Yates Cup appearances, falling to their vaunted rivals, the Western Mustangs, in both of those performances. This is a Queens team that, knows about last year and the year we're going into, that though a lot of people like to take their pot shots at, and I think it comes with the territory when you're Queens, that's been perhaps one of the most consistently good teams in the Steve Snyder era. And I forget, there was some numbers you threw my way a little while ago when we were kind of going over some of the coaches. Maybe we'll get into that, but let's start with what this year was for those who forgot where Queens wound up. As a team that ended up at 5-3, earning themselves a trip to Windsor in the first round of the playoffs, where they took out the Lancers, who ironically took them out in week one, to then fall to the Laurier Golden Hawks, a game that you and I were in the house for, which Queens had a lot of those Golden Hawk fans nervous going into that one, and a team that perhaps no word encapsulates their season more than injured. And unfortunately, that's been a trend for a few years here. Tom, what games, words, names, feelings, or anything are the things that come to you first when you think about the 2024 Queens Golden Gales?
Well, naturally, whenever you think of the Queens Gales, especially the last few years here, you're thinking of outstanding defenses and an outstanding run game. Not to say that the passing game isn't great, whatever, it's just that run game is so much better. But going into this year, it was purely outstanding defenses because it seemed like the entire friggin' offense was injured at some point. Alex Reekin goes down with an injury. In week 2 against McMaster, Jared Kasari has something going on with his ankle that's keeping him on and off throughout the entire season. I think we saw when we talked to our guy, Nez, what did we see, like 6 or 7 different O-line combinations because guys were injured and you had to move stuff around. They only had like 1 or 2 games where they had their full initial starting lineup of offensive linemen start and play the entire game. So this was a banged up season for the Golden Gales. And even despite all of that, considering how many guys they had go down, a 5-3 season is still pretty damn good. Not to mention making the trip down to Windsor, which is a 6-hour drive, and coming away with a big dub against the Lancers at home. And you and I both know how difficult it is to play there and win there. So this was a great season when all of those things are put into scope. But I'm sure the Queens faithful, they want to get back to winning Yates Cups because it's been a long damn time.
It certainly has. And just sticking on the injury bug, when we go to the 23 year into 24, the biggest hole that was seemingly needing to be filled was on the offensive line. And I'm sure we must have talked about this before. I can't recall when it was you brought it to my attention. But I think one of the first things that, made you stop and go, about this Queens team going into this year. And I want to take this moment to quickly pause and remind everyone again, Steve Snyder's time at Queens has been second to nearly nobody and what he's done there. But we came into this year a bit mystified that on that offensive line, they were having to replace guys like Ryan Berta and Evan Florin and Theo Grant. I believe Theo, who's still doing his thing in the CFL or clinging to a team. So he might not have been able to come back. But maybe I'll just pass it back to you that there was some suspicion that I'm pretty sure at least Berta and Florin, possibly Grant as well, but I'm pretty sure more so the first two, were able to come back. And we were looking at the pieces somewhere. I have a text I sent to you from probably maybe it was June or May of 2024 when we heard that Jared Kassar was coming back, and I'm like, put it down. That's my dark horse OUA MVP. I might have just used the term OUA MVP. We're thinking about Alex Vreekin, some of that talent in the receiving core that we'll get to, on top of the fact that you can go ahead and make a bet that that defense is going to be really, really solid under Coach Beck. Plus the talent there is, is incredible. But just seeing it from that offensive line perspective, and again, all the credit to Coach Nez and being able to, plug those gaps in his first year as OC with this team. But that offensive line piece, though, in the grand scheme of it, still allowed them to be one of the top 5 rushing teams in the league, was certainly something that had us going, wait, let's look into this a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, especially there's one thing when you're going into the season here, and you and I are both kind of speculating in terms of why somebody may not have come back or whatever the case. Some people just get to a spot where they go, you know what, I finished my 4-year career. I've got a job waiting for me here. It's time to move on. And if that's the case, power to you for sure. But like, to your credit, and something that we talked about previously here, let's not forget you are hosting a Vanier Cup in Kingston no matter what. And so if there's ever a time when you're thinking of, hey, you know what, maybe I should come back, maybe I want to really push and see where we can go, it's when you know that if you make it to the end of the line, you play a national championship at home. And that's got to be some extra oomph in there. I actually had the pleasure and the surprise of seeing Ryan Berta at one of our games in this high school season. I coached at Saint Jean de Brebeuf in Hamilton, and I look over at one of the coaches or one of the guest guys who comes in on game day. I go, I think I know you. He's like, yeah, I'm Ryan Berta. I'm like, what the hell are you doing here? He got into teachers college, and that's kind of what really drove him that way. But he was saying, he goes, hey, I spoke to some of the guys. If we could try and see about getting me into Queens to do teachers college or somewhere close by, maybe we could do that. Now, it doesn't work like that. I don't think you could just say, oh yeah, he's a football player. Hey, teachers college in Kingston. Why don't you just push this guy in here? But I think that was the big reason as to why he ended up leaving and transferring out. But certainly, I mean, especially when you look at, hey, first and foremost, those are 3 outstanding offensive linemen. And then you look at how many injuries that they had. And oh my God, if there was one position group where they could have used some depth, it would have been an offensive line. So that's another one that really stings in that regard.
Most certainly. And obviously, even with that group, one of the most notable names, and he was back, but on and off all year, was Jazz Kyra. And again, I don't know the full games played in front of me, but we know he was in and out all year long. But seeing Nicholas Henning step up from the H-back position, I know Nez gave us the rundown on it, whether it was a guy who was recruited in as an O-lineman, and then they're like, shoot, well, you know what? Like our H-back's essentially just a 6'0" lineman, just work in there, or whether he was a true, I think it's more actually that he was just like a super athletic dude. And then they're like, hey, you know what? Throw on a couple extra pounds and we can get you CFL, maybe even, maybe NFL bound south of the border, the way that he can move and just the raw athleticism he brings to the table. So, but still battling those injuries. And I think if we're on the theme of injury bug, I already mentioned Kasari, but it's this tale seemingly as old as time. And again, for a team that, let's start again, in 21 and 22, we're in the Yates Cups, duking out with a Western team that going back only a year ago, Queens was almost beating at home, right? Didn't reflect that way in those Yates Cup games, but again, just to give a little context. But the tale as old as time for this team is just I don't want to say inability as if it's some like problem within the building of these guys, but it's the number of quarterbacks they had to run deep, where you have a guy in Alex Vreekin who, and maybe you can bail me out here because I'm embarrassed, James Keenan, that's the name, who gets his first start. I think it was his first start in that 22 Yates Cup when James Keenan's injured. And so he's kind of getting thrown into the fire, or whatever analogy, in the context of someone being injured. And then this year, and going back into 2023 as well, 2 seasons ago, just seeing a bit of that injury bug start to hit him. And then this year, seeing Russell Weir and seeing Anthony Leo. And, by all accounts, Vreekin is the best talent in that system. And him being that Kingston guy, it's a great story if it can work out. And I want to talk about that. So, not to say too many things at once, but and I think it was you who really brought to my attention first. By the time we got to the end of the year, and it was really like the Anthony Leo show, young man was showing some good things out there, right? But again, all things being perfect, I'm sure they want Vreekin out there one way or another. We talked about this with Ottawa our last pod. Just need to get that consistency at the quarterback position.
Yeah, when you talk about how important it is to make sure that you've got guys who can really play, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit here. I think that Queen's receiving core is a lot, it's not talked about enough because I really like the guys who are out there, led by a guy in Nico Cuomo and what he's able to do. Nathan Falcone, obviously, Logan Walton. I mean, there's a bunch of dudes on that receiving core, and when you've got a few guys that are throwing to them, you can obviously you get a little off kilter. There's certain throwing aspects that are a little bit different. Maybe one guy leads a little bit more than another, or whatever the case may be. So it's tough to get going from that side of things. But I think for anybody who might have doubted that, oh, I don't know about this receiving core, Tom and Zach, you don't know what you're talking about, whatever. When you watch that playoff game against Laurier, and you and I know that Laurier secondary is damn good at what they do. And you're seeing at certain points, Anthony Leo is making great throws. Don't get me wrong. But there's more than a few times where he goes, hey, you know what? I'm going to throw a jump ball up here. And 9 out of 10 times, the Queen's receivers are coming down with them against guys like Malik Cote, against guys like Jahari Hastings. Like, these are quality defensive backs. And so you just start wondering, if you have a consistent quarterback in there the entire year who's able to really bring the best out of them, what's the ceiling look like, and how well does that do? And I think you and I have a tendency to kind of look at things with rose-colored glasses a lot of times here. Let's not forget that when Alex Vreekin was in here, I believe he played the first 5 games, and then he was out for Western and on from there. I was looking up some of the numbers. I think he threw 3 touchdowns to 7 interceptions at one point in time through 4 or 5 games. So it's not exactly like Alex Vreekin was blowing the top off when he was in there. Now, albeit he throws 4 interceptions against a Windsor defense that are ball hawks in their own right, and plus an Ottawa defense soon afterwards. So it's not like he's playing against scrubs by any means, for sure. But the entire league is also playing against these guys, and not as many quarterbacks had that many interceptions. So I'm just curious in terms of what's the mindset like in this kind of style. This is also the first time that Coach Nez is in as the OC. So it's a new offense, or new aspects of an offense to learn as well. So there's a lot of different varying factors in here. But I think, like you mentioned, if there's one thing that an offense, teams in general for sure, but an offense really needs, it's consistency at playing positions, whether that's on the offensive line, receivers, quarterback, at play calling. And I just don't think that they saw that on Queens, to no fault of their own, just so many damn injuries.
Yeah, and you were going through some of that depth at receiver, and Jack Ashby Jacobs is a name where,
yes,
gosh, I don't have it in front of me in terms of if he even put up numbers this year, if he got injured in this season or what it was, but a guy who they expected a lot from. And as you went through that list, you think about, and Nico Cuomo was a guy who was at the regional invitational combine that I was able to attend, and seeing him up person and without the pads on, and he fills out that 6'3", 198 very nicely. And as far as the y'all don't talk about Queens, like, I'm not going to try and hide from it. It is, I said it before, and I think the wording exactly was that this isn't not a sexy receiving core when you just look at some of these names. And that's somewhat always going to be the case when your bread is buttered running the ball first and foremost. And so just making sure you got some tough SOBs out there. You got, having that 2-back system, and they had a heck of a guy in Henning going 2 years back, and I'm forgetting the guy they had replacing him this year. But when you look at that receiving core, again, it runs really deep. You mentioned Logan Walton's name, though, in the mix, the first year out of Dartmouth. And I had to go back to the box score quick just to remind myself, oh, yeah, didn't he have a pretty impressive touchdown in that Windsor game? And yes, I'm just reminding myself that they were down by 5 points when the guy gets a 39-yard dot from Russell Weir to get the touchdown, plus the 2-point to James Preston. James Preston, that's who they had at H-back, I believe, to get them into the second round there alone. So again, weird season when it came all down to it. Weird games happened in Windsor at all times of the year. And So yes, the injury bug. But you know what? Before we go to the defensive side, though, again, this is a team where, and we'll do the thing where we go through like who the guys are that are kind of fifth year, fourth year eligibility, the guys who are kind of on that bubble. And look at some of the youth. Obviously, we talk about Jared Kasari a lot, but a couple names in that running backfield that should certainly have, especially the way they've been able to replenish that offensive line, and frankly, both lines for that matter. We'll get to the defensive side briefly. But the way they've been able to consistently have a solid run game in there, obviously Kasari makes it go. But you're able to look at, say, a guy in Jaden Gertzie McDonald, the first year out of Grimsby, Team Ontario veteran, who really filled in nicely this year. But then also thinking about Jaden Blackman out of London, he's listed as a third year. I think he missed a bit of time, but he was looking really good when we saw him in his first year going for them as well. So a lot of depth on this team where, again, the injury thing almost feels like not the most exciting comment to make because it's not really anything that anyone can do about it. But what's nice, and we'll go into the depth in terms of veterans versus young guys. There is some young depth on here, including thinking about Alex Leo only really being in his second year, Russell Weir being a third year guy as well. So fair what direction they want to go. A lot of youth on that offense. The trust that you have, knowing much like with Western, that O line's going to be there and they're going to be solid. From the offensive standpoint, again, if that defense can still be one of the best in the country, there's a lot here that you can look to think that, what? Again, as you highlighted, with some new terminology, a few new things, Nez obviously wasn't new to the team, but the way he's going to run things is going to be a little bit different from Flax. You know what? There's a lot of bullets in the chamber for him to play around with. My metaphors, I think, got a little weird there.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And when you're starting to look around and you say, hey, I don't know about this or that, or obviously Vregan going down and he gets injured, that's not what you want for sure. But let's not forget the last 3 games of the season, Queens goes up against at Western, at Laurier, and then it finishes off against Waterloo at home. And in those 3 games, Anthony Leo throws for 554 yards, 6 touchdowns, no interceptions. So obviously whatever he had going there is working for them on the passing game. Now, like you said, your bread is buttered running the damn football, and that's exactly what they did in a lot of those games, or at least attempted to. But still, knowing that you've got a guy who's not afraid to huck the ball up and is not afraid to really just trust his receivers and throw the ball downfield has got to fill you with some kind of excitement about what the future could certainly hold for you. Now, Anthony Leo, like you and I were talking about this, I think when we watched him against Western, he's not the biggest dude in the world. And so there's a lot of things when you look at like, he maybe doesn't have a height, maybe he doesn't have this, whatever, but he can launch the ball. I remember a few deep ball threats as they were playing against Western near the dying seconds of I believe it was the first half. And he's bombing the ball down the field to try and get after some clock, and he was moving it pretty good. So I think he answered a lot of questions that I personally had about how he could play, certainly getting thrown into the fire in the manner that he did. And I am now more and more confident on what the future of this Queens football team can look like on the offensive side of the ball, provided that everybody can friggin' stay healthy, because that is just going to be a killer every single time.
Well, staying healthy, and again, seeing who's staying on this team, and the health piece obviously isn't just on the offensive side of the ball, because we know Silas Hubert was banged up all year long. But let's at least take a break from just going through the rosters to at least get a sense of the years that some of these guys are in, thinking more of those senior guys, so we can kind of project and play around with these names before transitioning onto the defensive side of the ball. Apologies to every single fifth and fourth year guy. I'm really just honing in on the guys that are the somewhat higher importance. My apologies. But looking at guys on the fifth year, right off the jump, 2 guys that have been anchoring that defensive line in Eric Johnston, who I saw at the regional, who looked really strong in the bench, and of course Darian Newell, who got the invite straight to the national. 2 fifth-year guys. We'll come back. I don't want to pause on every single name here. Jazz Kyra, as you mentioned, in his 5th year as well. Van Wishart, defensive end, who talked about a guy who stepped up when Silas was down. Such doing so expertly at that position. 5th years as well include Josh McBain at linebacker. Jared Kasari. Kasari is, of course, I can get a master's program, so that always makes things a little bit odd. I don't know exactly how that works. Keegan Vanek, ball hawking defensive back. Nathan Falcone, as you mentioned, part of that receiving core that they have there. Liam Sutherland, who was also at the regional, look really good. Nico Cuema, who we mentioned that, and Nico Cuema as receiver. Some of the fifth year guys in terms of academic years. Again, that doesn't always translate into whether they're going to be back at all. For all these guys, it didn't necessarily translate, fifth year of eligibility either. So just keep that in mind. As far as some of the fourth year guys, we're thinking about the monster defensive end in Silas Hubert. They have Nicholas Henning, offensive lineman, H-back extraordinaire. Ashton Miller Melanson, talk about a ball hawk, one of our dudes. Hands down, Alex Vreeken's a fourth year player. And I think that was the last of the really notable guys in the mix there. And so, not a ton of names, and apologies. Again, there were other guys in there when we're focusing on, though, the guys in that list. As far as I know, all of them in theory could come back for one more dance, which is really exciting. And not to all of a sudden read off young guys on this team, but there are some really young guys. Queens have done a really nice job, again, in this Steve Snyder era of the last, 7 years, has been one of the best in terms of the recruiting, the branding. And I think it's not to kind of move off of it, but maybe just to add a little more light to this. I think it's made the most. The number of coaches and just other OUA sports people who talk about how annoying they find Queens' social media presence, I think that must be just catnip to the people at Queens being like, yeah, you like what we do, eh? Yeah, it's the classic George Costanza, right? It just sticks in there. Whatever they got to do, OKGs, KYA, the whole mix in there. Anyways, Tom, amongst those veteran players, that's a nice veteran crew to have, albeit, of course, not knowing who's back makes it a little bit tentative in terms of what that next year's club will be like. But man, oh man, is that a strong veteran core there?
Yeah, that's a solid core to really build a team around. And I think it's no secret as to why they were so successful in that 2022 and 2023 seasons, making it to back-to-back Yates Cups there. As you'll have heard on our combine recap here, if you're a Queens fan on that defensive side, I'd be nervous a little bit because while yes, everybody can come back and you're certainly hoping for that, Darian Newell and Silas Hubert had two hell of a days in Regina for that combine. And so especially when you look at a big athletic Canadian that can really come off the ball, contribute on specials, and potentially really disrupt things, that's where you're really starting to get a little nervous. I mean, even looking back at it last year, I was thinking, hey, you know what? For sure, we're going to see, there's a potential for Tyson Hergott to come back. And I think Lou Brubaker is still a really raw dude. I think he's going to come back. Nope. Two Canadians who were athletic as all hell and showed up at the combine. They get snatched up. They're playing for the Brubaker on the Ticats, Hergott on the Argos. Hergott wins a Grey Cup in his first year. Shout out to our guy doing that. But Silas and Darian had two really, really good days. I would not be surprised if the same thing kind of happens here. Darian Newell, I know we've already talked about this, but he had to leave after the first day for some personal stuff to go back home. And even despite that, his first day was so good that all of the scouts that I've spoken to were like, oh, damn, forgive me, Darian, I was not familiar with your game. And he really impressed. So from that side of things, you're a little nervous for sure because there's a potential to lose those two dudes. But I mean, you talk about some of the stalwarts on that team, Jarek Desari, obviously, and Alex Vreeken, but Keegan Vanek as well in that defensive secondary. I mean, Ashton Miller Melanson, I believe he's getting up there as well, is he not? If not, he's like a third or fourth year CIS All-Canadian as well, which is disgusting.
Well, so he was the third Gale joining the likes of Newell and Hubert at the National Combine. And I mean, firstly, just because I had the page in front of me when you were talking about Silas. Silas listed at 6'5", 265. Like, my goodness, you talk about a solid core. He must have some solid core on him. And put up 20 reps on the bench. And I bring that up because, and again, I have a lot of feelings about the way we do all these testing and things like this. This is a guy who's dealing with a shoulder injury darn near the whole season, missing time, playing through it, us talking with offensive guys around the league, coaches that is, talking about, actually, you know what, we're trying to attack him right now because he's still not properly taking on, pulling guards or H-backs the way he's favoring that shoulder. So to still put up the 20 reps is outstanding. And for, Queens fans, they're hoping they get those guys back without a doubt. But yeah, you mentioning Ashton's name there as well. I mean, as far as this defense, we can get into some of these names here. Tom, I mean, on the all my guy list of Tom Sterling's guys of 2024 sits number 44, Justin Pace, above the herd. Tom, talk about your guy, Justin Pace, arguably the best linebacker in at least the OUA and probably up there amongst some of the best in U Sports from last year.
Oh my goodness. When you get a chance to watch this, dude, and I promise you, if you are a lover of great linebacker play, great defense in general, go back and watch some of these Queens Golden Gales, because the way that Justin Pace plays, man, it is outstanding to see. He's one of the reasons why I said this multiple times throughout the year. He's my favorite player to watch. Now, I will, a little devil's advocate, it's pretty nice being a pretty good linebacker playing behind arguably the best defensive line in the entirety of U Sports. And so that helps out a ton as well. But you still see when offensive linemen get up to the second level, he's taking guys on, slipping guys if he has to, and he is not afraid to meet a running back in the hole. And 9 times out of 10, he is winning that battle, meaning he is knocking the guy back rather than getting knocked forward. I'll never forget, I believe it was against Laurier, and Tanner Nelms is a load himself, and Nelms and Pace meet in the hole, and there's a solid smack, and Justin Pace still puts him down on his back. So I was really, really loving everything that I saw from Pace. He moves really well. He's got a great defensive mindset from what I can see. I mean, I know that we say my guy a fair bit, and at this point, if we're going like a team of my guys, we probably got like 70 or 80 dudes. But man, Justin Pace, I cannot say enough great things about that dude. He was a pleasure to meet in person as well when I got a chance to meet him, but hell of a football player.
Yeah, no, he's all Canadian, my guy this year, and anchoring down that defense. And your point is well made about getting to play behind that defensive line that they have there, and really hard to retort from that standpoint. Though, again, when you actually just focus in on what he does, the way he takes on the Taron Nelmses of the world and some of those other big running backs and O linemen as well. I guess last thing, sticking with the defense, perhaps no bigger surprise this year. I mean, it'd be fun to come up with an award of like the biggest like who dat of the year. Has to go with first year, or technically I guess second year, but first year starting cornerback from out in BC, and Ian St. Arnaud. What was it? Was it 3 return touchdowns, 2 on missed field goals, 3 in total, 1 on a punt, something to that effect? It's so cool. We never really get this type of attention as offensive linemen, nor do the best offensive linemen, of like, you have to change up entirely how the other team plans around you. There's only certain types of guys out there. And St. Arnaud is a corner. When a team just says, we can't throw to that half of the field, when teams recognize that they can't kick to a whole third or half of a field, or, we talked, when Dawson Hodge had his little bit of a hiccup going back 2 years, and we talked about, well, how does this change now? All of a sudden, you as an offensive coordinator, if you're Todd Galloway, when where's that range now? How Ian St. Arnaud's ability to return the ball affects, or at least must affect, you'd be either supremely arrogant or a bit of an imbecile to not think, as an offense coordinator playing this team and special teams coordinator, just when do we got to punt? When do we got to kick it out of bounds? Do we risk the field goal if it's on the cusp of our guy's range, knowing that if it misses, there is a strong chance it goes for 6? And I wish I had the game up in front of me, but that one game where there was a swing of like 17 points in the span of no time at all, with the missed field goal to the touchdown and then add on something else. Ian St. Arnaud, again, we'll come up with something a little cleaner as far as maybe the who dat of the year, of a guy, especially I think coming out of province, that just blew our socks off this year.
Oh my goodness. I mean, when you look at that guy and how he was able to do things, it's one thing to say, oh wow, he got one on us, or he took one back to the house. Well, let's make sure that he doesn't do that. To get two missed field goals and take them back to the house is just insane. Thinking of how many guys you need to go through, and I'm pretty sure he tied the record for longest field goal return or longest return for a touchdown because he picked one after it missed in the very back of the end zone and took it like 109 yards to the opposite end zone in order to score, something along those lines, which was just outstanding. But what I really get appreciation for, and once again, we've talked about this, certainly at the defensive back level, we've said this, and even as a returner, I don't think you get the true value. You can't really see it from the stream or from a TV angle. You have to see it in person when you know what you're looking for. When you and I got a chance to watch the Queens Laurier game in the playoffs, we saw from the special team side, you got Tayshawn Jackson on one side, you got Ian St. Arnaud on the other. Two guys who are battling, but
Beautiful.
two very different styles of doing that. Tayshawn Jackson still as a young guy going through, he's pure athleticism and raw talent in there, and he's making guys miss to go through. What I saw from Ian St. Arnaud is this mindset of I'm going to set up blocks and I'm going to lean one way to make sure that defenders are coming over just so I can cut back the other way and set up a block for me. And that's how that gets kicked off. Once you get past that first layer on that defensive secondary, for the most part, you get through that umbrella, as they say, you're off to the races at that point. And that's why St. Arnaud was so good at what he was doing, is because he was helping his blockers in front of him lean one way, cut the other, and just helping to set things up, which A, creates clean holes for you, and B, ensures that you are not putting your blockers in bad positions where they need to hold or block somebody in the back or whatever the case may be. So credit to that young man, and credit to our guy, special teams coordinator,
Our guy.
Phenom, but who doesn't really want to talk to us on game day. So I'm not even going to say your name, but you know who you are. But an outstanding job on the special team side of things as well this entire year.
Take that, Coach Taggart. You know what's what I love about you bringing up the parallel with Tayshawn Jackson, and I know we talked about that, but the way you were talking specifically about St. Arnaud's ability to set up blocks, it's like, and I don't want to do the thing where you end up kind of putting one person down to talk about another. That's not what this is at all, because Tayshawn, I mean, without Tayshawn Jackson, Guelph beats Laurier in that regular season game, right? I remember these things. But the way you talk about St. Arnaud's ability to set up those blocks are as if he were an offensive player, and I'm certain this guy played offense as a kid growing up. There's no doubt. There's no way you're that fast and athletic. And I'm trying to remember, was it the Finley family that reached out to us when we were talking about him? I was like, oh yeah, he grew up playing with Jackson. He's the fastest kid out here, all these types of things. But nonetheless, you talk about him as if he sees the field the way that I try to, you try to coach running backs to set up blocks to prevent, holds and all these types of things and be able to get the biggest angles. It's remarkable, and just a curiosity to wonder, like in the world of, like, not to get too hyperbolic, but we're here now. In the world of the Shohei Otanis, and in a much more apt parallel, the Travis Hunters, you wonder if there's a point, if you're Coach Nez, you go over to Beck Manis every now and then, you say, hey man, I got an idea. Can we put him at the field side and just tell him, run, and just see how that tilts the defense.
Hey, how about just let's send him in at running back. Let's have him swing out. Let's do a little screen action with the receivers on a quad set here and see if he can't pick his way through and score a touchdown. Hell yeah, I think he should be looking at that.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, God, Nez, come on. Give me, Nez, as soon as you listen to this, give me a call, man. I want to talk to you about this. This is exciting stuff. But again, all the more reason. Well, you go through this roster, you look at a team in Queens that, perhaps has one of the nicer home field advantages in terms of both. Yeah. Like that stadium is electric, and we're slightly spoiled that the two times we've been there in this decade have been for Vanier Cups. So, I mean, that's always going to be really cool, but it's a great venue. The only true bold in environment that you're going to have. The wind is always a pain out there. I mean, it's a team that went undefeated at home, right? I mean, these things I think matter, especially in that context of historic program, building a program, that recruiting piece that we talk so glowingly about that they've been doing such a good job of. And and it's really, again, the proof's in the pudding, and we talk about this with literally all these teams but one, year in year out, where it's like, well, what happened? Well, you ran into the team that beat you, right? So often it's just, it unfortunately becomes that simple. And Tom, I'm gonna put you on the spot because we were talking about Snyder. I think you and I were going through the coaching kind of carousel in the league and kind of being who's maybe in that hot seat? Who are the guys that are just maybe, it's too early to tell? Who are the guys that are just, made men? And you brought to my attention, I'm sorry if I'm putting it on the spot, but you brought to my attention some numbers about Steve Snyder's time at Queens in the context of, again, Queens football, which I don't have the numbers in front of me, but goes back quite a while.
In the yes, and I know exactly what you're talking about. In the modern era, so let's say in the past like 50 years or so, based on the idea of making playoffs, making to Yates Cups, and whatever the case, this 5 or 6 year stint has been the most successful in Queens football history from the fact of them constantly making playoffs, getting to back-to-back Yates Cups, even without technically winning those. Now, obviously, you look at some outstanding teams like the team I'd never shut up about in that 2009 Vanier Cup team, and you think, oh, what are you talking about here? But then let's not forget they don't go back to the Yates Cup for until 2013, and even from there they lose pretty badly to Western, and then there's a big stretch where they miss the playoffs a few years, and so there's Queens for a long time had a big up and down system where they were making the playoffs and getting to Yates Cups and then missing the playoffs and then getting up and going down. So this stint here has been some of the most successful in Queens football history, with consistently making the playoffs and getting to, I think, at least the semifinals in his time there, which is pretty outstanding from that regard as well.
Take that, Nate Hobbs. It's it's been excellent. It's been a standout year, or sorry, it's been a standout half decade under Coach Snyder. And again, some of the consistencies, thinking about what Coach Beck has been there, and we've talked so glowingly about the actual players on the team. Like, man, by the numbers, it's right up there. By pretty much all accounts, whether it's points per game, rushing yards, passing yards. This is a top 5 defense, and frankly, that's probably on the lower end of how they've been in the last couple of years, because it's the team that's usually nationally ranked amongst the best of the best. So maybe they took a slight dip there, but also amongst the top leaders in sacks, amongst the top leaders in interceptions. And with these guys they have back there, the Keegan Vance, the Ashton Melançons, Ian St. Arnaud, like threats to score when they have the ball in their hands. So just so many weapons on all facets of the game, in all facets of the game. It's, undoubtedly, and you wonder too, is there now, maybe is any of the pressure off that the Vaniers out of the house in any regard, and kind of take the proverbial attention, the eye of Sauron, move it somewhere else, and they can kind of be like, all right, fellas, let's really try and come up with our best version of ourselves, whatever that might look like. And again, great pieces there by all metrics. I do think there is a lot of you hate us because you ain't us when it comes to Queens football, because man, oh man, like, you'd be lying if you were as a coach and looking at what goes on there, being like, that'd be kind of cool to have those facilities. That'd be kind of cool to have that history there. It'd be kind of cool to, it goes on and on and on. So, Queens, I doff my cap. Tom, we've done this with all these teams, taking the way too early look forward to kind of see who these guys are riding with, what neighborhood they're living with, what tier they're in. 5-3 last year. Let's start with this. On the whole, 5-3, getting bumped to the eventual Yates Cup champions, the Laurier Golden Hawks, with one of the best QB, all these things, right? Eventually getting bumped in the second round, but giving them a really hardy fight, having barely escaped Windsor with the quarterfinal win. Let's start with the year in review overall. Like, is it the thumbs up? Are we kind of teetering or tottering? Thumbs down?
On the 2024 year, I'd still say it's a thumbs up on that year. I still think that this is a successful year, especially when you think of how many injuries that you're dealing with, all of the inconsistencies, especially on the offensive side of the things, and to still, despite all of that, make it into the semifinals for the Yates Cup and give Laurier a hell of a game in that semifinal, let me remind you as well. I think from that standpoint, this is a successful year from that side of things. I think that while certainly the Queen's faithful is hoping for more and more, and everybody wants to win championships and everything. I still think that you should be very happy and proud of what you're finishing here. When you were looking forward into 2025, I think that just off the top of my head, without knowing anything about scheduling, without knowing anything about anything else, and kind of looking forward at what we know about some of the other leagues here, I don't think that another 5-3 or 6-2 season is. I think that is a realistic kind of metric here, especially as we don't know what's the status of Alex Vreekin, depending on if he's coming back. How healthy is he? What does that offensive line look like? How healthy is Jarek Kasari? There's a lot of question marks there. So I think a 5-3 or 6-2 is certainly something that you can hang your hat on and say, this is a team that's going to finish in that upper echelon of the OUA and is certainly not a team that you really want to be facing come the playoffs.
I think that's a really strong assessment. I'm with you on the thumbs up from last year, all those things taken into consideration. And, as far as next year's concerned, and obviously we're caveating all this the way too early predictions and this, that, and the third. And you just look around the league and, right off the jump, you say Laurier and Western, like, hey, look, recognize that on any given day, Queens can be in a game with those two teams, but you're going to go ahead and say, okay, look, gun to my head, who am I picking to win a game in any of these matchups? I'm not going to take Queens in those games. There just is, not that I'd be surprised if they pull off the win, but, so you put that aside. Guelph's a fascinating conversation, and I almost got into it, not like, fisticuffs or nothing, but into that conversation at the regional combine, because Queens brought the whole darn like coaching staff and like the team chefs and everything down to Waterloo for that day, about where Guelph and Queens stack up with one another. And then Windsor's fascinating because, yeah, we can, and we'll be talking about Windsor on the next episode following this one, and they pair nicely. I got all the love in the world for Windsor, blue collar gold swagger, and the Windsor folks can certainly look at that playoff loss at home and it burns and say, "Hey, look, y'all had a miracle at the end to a rookie receiver from a backup quarterback, and this, that, and the third." And then you say to yourself, Alex Vreekin threw 4 interceptions. I think 2 of which go to my guy Robert Springer, whatever name I was calling, Bobby Springs, out there, but 4 interceptions, and you still barely lose week 1 traveling to Windsor, one of the longest travels you have to do. And I say all that to say that game, one fewer interception perhaps is all it takes to change the tide. And I don't like to usually do the whole if this and if that and whatever, but Queens wins that game, which very likely could have happened. Then they're hosting Windsor in that first round, and Queens hosting Windsor, I don't think. I'm still saying Queens is winning, and I think it's a much more sound game. I think that home field advantage for Windsor is what made that first one go their way and what made the last one come down to the wire. Queens at home, so I'm kind of putting them ahead of Windsor for right now, standings aside. And yeah, so again, in that 5-3, 6-2 team, and you mentioned it beautifully when we talked about Ottawa coming off, talking about Carleton, where it's kind of cool that maybe this is going to keep happening this way, where it's like, Carleton, your number one objective next year, you got to beat Ottawa. Hey, Ottawa, your number one objective next year, you got to beat Queens. And so if you're Queens, you're then kind of wondering who's that team nipping at our heels that, we played a lot, that knows us really well, that might be able to steal that one. That becomes Ottawa, and all that to be said. Yeah, I think if you fall to 4-4, however that shakes out, that doesn't really, bode all that well for them, because I think, this is a team that beat Guelph last year. I might think that Guelph's in a better position as a team right now. I don't know, we can talk about that, debate it, but nonetheless, Queens beat them. Tom, that all sounded like a great podcast about the Queens Golden Gales. Golden Gales, give me a K, yeah, Tom. Excellent. All right, there we go. Any last thoughts about this club before we sail into the sunset?
Yeah, I think that this is a team that has really done a great job in a lot of areas, and I think especially post-pandemic, when we got back into form, you and I are thinking, man, is this the return of the Queens Gales? And this is the aforementioned return to the championship kind of years in that. There is still, you talk about Carleton, you got to beat Ottawa. Ottawa, you got to beat Queens. Queens, you have to beat Western. I know that that's something that not a lot of teams have done, and the only team that's done it twice in one season has been Laurier for the longest time here. But if you want to get to where you want to go, and this is just a generic message to all teams for sure, but especially to the team that's got the historic rivalry, you got to beat Western. You've been so damn close so many times, including the unbelievable Hail Mary that happened a couple of years ago in your house. But you have to find a way to beat those guys. They are constantly going to be standing in your way. And this is one of those where it's not even, oh, maybe we can, think that they're not going to be on our regular season schedule. No. I've spoken to a couple of the OUA officials. That is officially marked as a rivalry and is always prioritized every single year, as it rightly should be, on this is a rivalry game. We have to play this game. So no matter what, you will always at least once see the Western Mustangs. You got to find a way to beat those guys.
What a bad beat for Queens that is. I know what? I love these rivalries, but there's part of me that's like in the 8-game season, maybe we got to mix it up a little bit. But hey, I mean, those colors are a beautiful thing. And I'll still, to this day, man, Tom, we've been at some great OUA football games in, the last, since the pandemic. And I've seen some amazing football games going back to, my first year at Guelph, darn near 14 years ago, I guess. One of the coolest events I ever attended was still the blackout game in 2022, Queens at Western. I forget how many people packed Western Alumni Stadium, and it is outstanding. So you know what? Again, I'm sure I've made my jests towards the Queens Golden Gales in my time, and even contemporarily, it's kind of fun to poke fun at the program that has all the glitz and the glamour, but there is a little substance that they have used to earn all that glitz and glamour, no doubt. Tom, fantastic job as always. Let me actually get that K-ya, Tom. K-ya.
Hey-ya.
K-ya. I love it. All right. Well, beautiful. Well, we set it up immaculately, because our next pod will be talking about those Windsor Lancers out there in Win City under the golden arches. And we'll talk a little blue collar and gold swagger. This Tom set up. We'll have another podcast that'll be coming out. If you're listening to this, the pod might be out as ready, but talking a little combine season and all that's been going on. But it'll be Windsor coming for you next week. So make sure to tune in. We'll be right here at the 55.